Today, of course, is the day in which we talk about the Holy War. No, I am not talking about that little football game taking place a little bit later on tonight. As a matter of fact, when I was getting on the elevator to come down here today, Jim Noorlander said to me, "Rise and shout, the Cougars are out." I shuddered at that because I don't think Jim realized a few years ago my oldest son, who stands about 6'6" and weighs 325 pounds, was an offensive lineman for the University of Utah. So when Jim said that today, I just kind of shuddered a little bit. The Holy War that we're talking about, of course, is a different kind of war that is taking place, I think, in this country. As many of you believe, we believe in the framework of this country and the documents that help get it started. And we're talking about the Declaration of Independence and certainly the U.S. Constitution. We believe in our founding fathers, and we believe that those founding fathers were inspired by our Heavenly Father. There are others who believe that the Constitution of the United States has just become an old, dusty document that is no longer relevant to the issues that confront this country today. We know differently, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So it is really a pleasure to be here with you today. We have a wonderful, wonderful program. I want to remind you and ask you, and I just did this myself, if you would, either mute or turn off your cell phones. Look, everyone reaches. I just love it. You do what I ask. This is great. My children don't do this. This is great. But if you would, because we are filming this, and by being here, you have consented to allow us to do this. So thank you again for being here. This is a great program. I know you'll enjoy it. Someone once described the American voter today as couch potatoes because they really don't take the time to get involved. Well, you are not couch potatoes. You have taken time to get involved today and to learn more, and I think that is absolutely wonderful. So let's begin this morning. We will begin with an invocation by Pastor Chris Crowder of the Layton Christian Academy. Now, following Pastor Crowder's prayer, we would ask you to please stand for the Utah Society Sons of the American Revolution Color Guard, who will present the colors this morning. Now, they're exact replica uniforms, and these guys are just fantastic, are uniforms of the Continental Army, and they remind us of the spirit of 1776 and, of course, America's struggle for independence. The commands and the ceremony this morning are historically accurate. These guys know what they're doing. They don't mess around, to be real honest. They're historically accurate to the patriot armies of the American Revolution. Now, following that, we will ask you to remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. We will now proceed with our invocation, first of all, by Reverend Crowder.
Would you bow your heads with me? Our dear gracious Heavenly Father, we just come before you this morning. We give thanks for this great country, God, this country that was founded on your principles, God, and on your grace. We just pray that each and every person here this morning will get something out of this, be able to take it back. And in the end, we need to spread the good news that America is still great, that America still believes in God, that America still looks to you for your provision and your grace. So today we just pray that you'll bless each and every speaker, that you'll bless each and every person here, that your hand and your provision will be upon this. And God, that at the end we will give glory to you for everything you've done in this great country. We just give you praise in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Crowder. Now, if you would all stand, and we'll have the presentation of colors by the Utah Society Sons of the American Revolution. join me now in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Color bearer, post colors. Color bearers, salute colors. Recover. Color guard, to the left, face. Mark, time. To the front, march.
Please be seated, and could we have a round of applause again for the Utah Society Sons of the American Revolution. They are just great and really bring the spirit of 1776 to these meetings, don't they, and the beauty of America. The one thing, I've got to get me one of those hats. I don't know what it is about those hats, but I've got to get me one of those hats someday. Again, my name is Rod Arquette. I have the opportunity each and every afternoon to host a radio show on Talk Radio 105.7 FM, 570 AM, and talk about many of the issues that you're going to be talking about today. I've attended the third conference that I've been asked to MC. They're always wonderful, and we'll get to know Bert and Kathy, the real force behind this, here in a few minutes. But the events today, you are going to learn about many changes that are taking place in this country here and in Utah. When it comes to changes, I'm talking about land use, the battle that goes on and the fight that we have not only here in Utah, but across the United States and especially in the western states. We'll talk about how gold and silver will be used as legal tender in this country and how our country and its sheriffs really have the constitutional authority to protect our inalienable rights. And we'll talk about that today as well. We'd like to begin, of course, this conference in recognizing our wonderful sponsors. Without them, events like this do not happen. And we want to especially thank our conference partners today, the American Lands Council, the Utah Precious Metals Association, and the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, and the many sponsors who have made this event possible. They are listed on the screen, I believe, behind to my left. Sorry, we are going to get this other screen fixed for those of you on this side of the room. We'll have it fixed shortly for you. But without them, of course, this event could not happen. So could we have a round of applause for all those wonderful sponsors this morning? Thank you. And I want to remind you as well, many of the sponsors and partners have booths outside. You may have seen them coming into the conference center this morning during our breaks. If you would step outside and look at the materials and the books they offer, they would appreciate your support, and we look forward to hearing from some of them and our sponsors a little bit later on in the program this morning. Now, I'd like to take a minute and introduce two people who are really, I think, the driving force behind this each and every year, and we're talking about Bert and Kathy Smith. Many of you know Bert and Kathy. I have a bone to pick with Bert, and I'll explain that here in just a minute. For those of you who do not know them, let me share a few things about Bert and Kathy Smith. Bert is a World War II veteran. World War II veteran, if you can think about that. He is co-founder and owner of Smith & Edwards. How many of you out there have never been to Smith & Edwards? Shame on you. Shame on you. You need to get up there. Now, here's my bone to pick with Bert. My father was a small business owner. I grew up in a small village in upstate New York, and he had a chain of small grocery stores called Arquette's Superette. The slogan was, "If we don't have it, you don't need it." So I drove by Smith & Edwards one day, and I saw a slogan out there, something to the effect that said, "If we don't have it, you don't need it." Is that right, Bert and Kathy? I think I'm pretty close to that. Okay, we've got it if you can find it. All right, you're off the hook, Bert, because I thought you were stealing my dad's slogan. You have to go to those stores. They're absolutely amazing. You could spend days there and getting lost and trying to find things, right, Bert? No, they have it very well organized. It's great. Both Bert and Kathy, as you know, have dedicated themselves over the years, and they are champions for the American way of life. It is their deep passion, I believe, to make sure that we understand the beliefs and principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. At this time, I would like to invite Bert and Kathy to come forward to welcome you and to kick off the event, and really today with a special tribute to their mentor and hero, well-known author, weekly columnist, Henry Lamb. Joining Kathy and Bert on the stand will be Howard Hutchinson, Michael Coffman, and Zeldin Nelson, all longtime friends of Henry Lamb, whose passing last May was really a great loss to this nation. Bert and Kathy?
Thank you, Rod. I'm glad that Bert got himself off the hook there. We are so delighted that you are here, and we know that you all share the same passion that we have for this great country and for freedom and liberty, and we have planned a wonderful day. There are so many people who've been involved in the planning, and we thank you all. I want to especially recognize our conference partners, the Constitutional Police Peace Officers, Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, the American Lands Council, and also Larry Hilton, Brad Galvez with the Utah Monetary Summit, and then all of our wonderful sponsors. And thank all of you for being part of our day today. And we especially want to pay a tribute to Henry Lamb, the reason that we're here today at this conference.
Well, I want to add my welcome, same as Kathy, to have you all here. It's friends and wonderful people that's here. And we'll have a great time, and there's a good program lined up. Kathy has worked hard, her and her committees, and it'll be well worth your while. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of good information for you to take home. It's been a long road for me. I started when I was 26 years old on this quest. I got mad at the BLM and the Forest Service, and I've been fighting them ever since. They're not needed. We don't need them at all. They failed in what they do. And they're trying their best to put the livestock people, miners, and oil men out. And they're destroying the nation, along with all the other people of the federal government. So we'll move forward with this program of honoring Henry Lamb. Was a great friend of ours, and he was the one that started the Freedom 21 to offset Agenda 21, which is the big goal to take over into the United Nations. And a lot of our counties and cities have already fell into this trap. We've got to get these counties and cities cleaned out of the sustainable development, terrible trap. So we'll move forward with Kathy, or with Hutchinson.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm certainly pleased to be here. We wanted to pay tribute to Henry Lamb. I thought one day that it would be really nice to travel back in time and be able to meet some of our founding fathers. What a thrill to meet Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. Benjamin Franklin. And as I was thinking that, I realized I've met people like this. There's one right here. There's one right here. And certainly Henry Lamb was one of those people. I'd like you to, if we could go to the next slide. Can you go to the next slide? Well, I want you to hear Henry.
I want to tell you about a few of the things that I have learned during these last 5 years of intensive research. Perhaps the most startling thing that I can share with you is that all of the conspiracy theories that you've ever heard about one world government, about the UN takeover of the world, all of those conspiracies have now been laid to rest. There's nothing conspiratorial about it. It's all published. The UN-funded Commission on Global Governance began meeting in 1992 in earnest and met for 4 years, and last fall released their final report. It is entitled Our Global Neighborhood. A few of the things that they wish to do: create a world-standing army under the day-to-day command of, who else? The UN Secretary General. They recommend the creation of a new Economic Security Council, into which the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations Development Program, and the World Trade Organization would all be consolidated. A unified worldwide banking scheme, currency. I don't think I need to draw any more pictures on that point. Now, those non-government organizations like ours that are not accredited by the UN, we are called populist trash, activists, who can destroy, they say, in a moment, years of deliberation. And you're darn right. And I have been challenged on the radio and in audiences like this. Mr. Lamb, there's no such thing as a global agenda. Hey, friend, you're absolutely wrong. Here it is. It's called Agenda 21. Agenda 21. The primary document presented in Rio de Janeiro and adopted by more than 100 heads of state, including George Bush, which lays out in intricate detail all of the transformation that must take place in society in order for it to become sustainable as they define sustainability. This may be available at the United Nations bookstore. I had to pick this up. I had not seen one until last July, had not been able to get one. I happened to be in Geneva attending a United Nations meeting, and I went to the bookstore and bought the thing. I believe it cost $45. Now, the Conference of the Parties held its first meeting in Nassau last December. At that first meeting, the United Nations Environment Program presented them with a global biodiversity assessment. Started in 1992 with a grant from the Global Environment Facility for $3.3 million, orchestrated and coordinated by the World Resources Institute and the World Wildlife Fund and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. This is 1,140 pages that explains how to implement the 16-page treaty on biodiversity. The last 200 pages, section 13, deals specifically with a system of protected areas. It defines what a system of protected areas is. It includes core wilderness areas surrounded by buffer zones, similar to those used in the biosphere reserves, created under a UNESCO program and promoted by the United States Man in the Biosphere program. There are 382 biosphere reserves around the world, 47 of which are in the United States, not under authority of any treaty, but by voluntary agreement with the United Nations. These biosphere reserves are to be the nucleus for the core wilderness areas. Scratching my head here, what on earth is going on? And then I stumbled on page 993, and friends, if you don't think that's some heavy reading at night, page 993, after describing these protected areas, sums it all up by saying, the recently published Wildlands Project in the United States is the central theme of protected areas. And on page 15 of the Wildlands Project, Dr. Reed Noss says that we must convert at least 50% of the land area of North America to wilderness, off limits to human beings. Those core wilderness areas are to be interconnected by wilderness corridors off limits to human beings. Those wilderness areas are to be surrounded by buffer zones that may have limited resource use under the supervision and permitting of the federal government, in collaboration with non-government organizations. Human population is to be resettled into the remaining 25% of the land, into communities that are described as sustainable communities. Now let me put a parenthesis right here for a moment. He created what he called a White House task force on ecosystem management. He called 20 federal departments together and said, you will create an ecosystem management policy, and you will implement the ecosystem management policy throughout the federal government, Department of Interior, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, Department of Education, throughout the federal government. They developed what they called multimedia enforcement. Where they run into a problem with a community that will not accept this ecosystem management concept, multimedia enforcement means that all 20 federal agencies descend on the community and begin inspections and writing tickets. I couldn't believe it.
I think that Henry Lamb is in that vein of founding fathers. He truly believed in the Constitution and liberty. He founded the Environmental Conservation Organization. He worked with Dr. Coffman on establishing Sovereignty International, and subsequently the Environmental Conservation Organization turned into Freedom 21. If we could go to the next slide, please. It's wonderful when technology works. There's our logo. There is the web address. It's www.freedom21.org. That's Henry Lamb, and behind him, of course, is the Constitution, and it was deeply held within Henry's heart. We salute him today as being inducted into the Patriots Hall of Fame. Thank you very much.
I first met Henry in a small, well, it wasn't small, it was about 150 people quite like what we're having here today. Small meeting of one of the very first Patriot groups in New Hampshire about 20 years ago, maybe a little longer than that. I can't remember for sure. And we got to talking, during the break and realized we were kindred spirits and started to work together. Then the Convention on Biological Diversity came up in the U.S. Senate in the early 1990s, and we worked on that together. I'll be talking more about that this afternoon. And the fact that we were able to stop, almost single-handedly, the United Nations treaty an hour before the cloture vote to ratify the treaty. Literally a miracle from God. There's no other way you can describe it. And Henry and I have worked on many, many other projects. We didn't work in collaboration on everything, but our ideas were identical as far as what we needed to help the American people see. And I came at it from one way, he came at it from another, and together I think we did a great job in helping people to understand the threat that this great nation is under right now from a new ideology, and I'll be talking about that later this morning. The fact is that we really, really need to start taking action. And Henry would be right there with me right now, calling every one of you to start putting some shoe leather on the ground and helping candidates that will bring a constitutional republic back to life that is almost lost now. We're not there yet. There is hope, but it requires a lot of work on our part. And I salute Henry, I know all of us do, and what he was able to do during his lifetime. It was fantastic. I thank God that he had as long as he did. I wish he was still with us, as many of you do as well. But he's not, and we need to honor him and continue the fight. Thank you.
We actually planned it this way. You can all go to the website, and we'll have these clips there, utahsfreedom.org. And I know these guys feel bad, so put your arms around them later. We can fix it. We can get it on the website. We're going to proceed. Rod will come up. We have a timekeeper right here, Sean Hawley. Wave your hand. He's got a challenge because we're probably about 30 minutes behind right now. So pick it up a pace, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert, Kathy, Howard, and Michael. Now, this morning, as you know, we have a great lineup of both local and national speakers, really, I think, to help us understand the critical issues which are facing our country today. We will first hear from Utah Congressman Rob Bishop. Congressman Bishop has served the 1st District for the state of Utah now for 5 terms. He is known as a champion of states' rights and is working hard for Utah's 10th Amendment rights. Congressman Bishop is a great guy. Remember a few months ago, the battle between the federal government, the Department of Health, I think it was, and Davis High School and Box Elder High School said, "Don't you dare sell sodas during the lunchtime." Well, Congressman Bishop stood up on the floor of the House and said, "This is the most absolutely ridiculous rule I've ever heard in my life." And you can see that. I think it's still up on Utah. He gave an impassioned speech about the school he attended, which was Davis High School. Is that correct, Congressman Bishop? My children have gone to Davis High School. All Davis darts, shoot straight, and always hit a bullseye. And that's what Congressman Bishop has been doing for a number of years. After Congressman Bishop, we'll be delighted to hear from Jim Noorlander, who will share a few remarks from his personal story about finding the meaning of liberty and freedom. Now, his essay, by the way, has been printed. It's on all your tables there for you to enjoy, and I would encourage you, if you have a moment today, to read it. If not, today, take it home this weekend and read it. We will then hear again from Dr. Michael Coffman. He is a noted author, scientist, and educator who will share with you today a few remarks concerning the battle between liberty and tyranny. Ladies and gentlemen, our list of speakers begin with Utah Congressman Rob Bishop. Congressman Bishop.
Hey, I appreciate very much the opportunity of being here for a little while. Everything that is in blue on these slides over here in Ohio and Virginia and the state of Utah is private property. Private property, of course, is that which is what forms the tax base for all state and local governments. And you can see Ohio and Virginia are doing fairly well in the amount of private property they have. We here in the state of Utah are slightly less blessed with private property. And one of the things, it's not just the amount of private property, not just the tax base that's there, but the way property is dealt with talks about the soul of government. Henry Maine once wrote that nobody is at liberty to attack property and at the same time say they value civilization, because the history of the two cannot be disentangled. It is private property that rises us from the position of political slavery. Madison himself wrote that alone is what, okay, this is farther than I am, and I'm old. That alone is the just government which secures to every man whatever is his own. See, to the Founding Fathers, personal property and the right of private property, if not greater than, was at least equal to every other right that they respected, including religion and speech and the press. It is John Adams who also said that the biblical invocation, not that thou shalt not steal, applies to government as well as it does to individuals. Now, I don't want to sound like a history teacher, but that's what I was. So I would like to just go through a slight quick history of the change in the way government lands takes place. And I want you to realize that the view we have on land in this country every 50 to 60 years seems to shift. There is a paradigm shift that takes place. So if you start in the mid-1700s, colonial times, the land was free and it was used to encourage people to come over here. The reaction to the line of the proclamation, limitation, tells you how important it was to those people. Go back another 50 and 60 years from that time, we had the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. Our Founding Fathers realized how they were mistreated by the British and didn't want to impose that on others. So by 1802, the original 13 states had voluntarily given up their western lands. There was now government territory, and it was the intention to make sure that all those new areas come into the nation with an equal footing. So they passed the Northwest Ordinance and the Land Ordinance and everything else to do that. We even offered the Canadians the ability to join us on the equal footing with the original 13 states, and you notice there was a lack of effort on that, but they didn't do it. Nonetheless, we did not start this nation with the Department of Interior. That won't happen until 1849. But there was always a government land office whose purpose was to sell land, and that was naturally part of the Treasury Department. Because there was a shift at that time that public land was not just simply, or land was not simply there just to be taken, it was also a source of revenue. By the 1830s, 25% of all the money the federal government was bringing in and using was coming from the sale of land in the territories. It would have been an even better approach to raise money for the country if it had been for the fact that the government didn't want to kick out squatters. About 50, 60 years later, we're post-Civil War time, and the decision is no longer to use sale of lands as a revenue source, but to encourage settlement so people actually come into the new Western territories and build an empire that goes from coast to coast. And at that time, you changed the name squatters to homesteaders, and they passed the Homestead Act and the Desert Lands Act, and they keep a myriad of those acts. The last Homestead Act was actually passed in 1916. But as Robert Nelson, who's a land scholar from the University of Maryland, will point out, all those schemes failed because the people who were organizing those efforts to sell land lived thousands of miles away in Washington from where the land was actually controlled. They didn't understand what they were doing, which is a phenomenon that lasts even today. So go back another 50, 60 years. It is now the Progressive era. The Progressives realized that all those efforts of homesteading had failed in their law, and so instead of coming up with a new program, they simply decided, we just might as well keep it. There was no plan involved. There was no master concept of what they would do with all the property. They just decided to keep it. It was an era which there was a love for public property that was far stronger than their respect and the desire they had to secure private property. So, for example, we started with the National Forest. National Forest was created by both stealth and the big lie. The stealth part came with Grover Cleveland, took an 1891 law, used it in 1897. 10 days before he was out of office, he put $22 million into a trust for the public national forest system. Congress quickly reacted to veto that, something that he himself vetoed just as he was walking out the door. When Teddy Roosevelt came into office, Congress decided to be preemptive. They passed a law that would prohibit him from adding to our federal forest reserve. He saw a loophole in the law, and he created 16 million acres of new forest reserve and then signed the law that prohibited him from doing what he had just done. The big lie in creating a national forest system was, first of all, you got to scare people, and so the idea was convince them that if the federal government takes over, it's going to be the robber barons who will control all the forest land. No truth to that, but it was a good enough argument. The second one was there would be a timber famine. In 1868, the public land, or the government land office said, if we don't have the federal government controlling timberlands, we will run out of trees in 30 years. 30 years from that date, the Secretary of Interior said, if you don't have the federal government controlling all our timberland, we'll run out of trees in 25 years. That was the New Deal, which said, if you don't have the federal government controlling trees, we will destroy our forest system, even though in the 1940s and 1950s you will find that state and private forests were far healthier than the federal forest system was. Even the Obama administration at the beginning has said, unless the federal government takes over all federal, state, and private forests, you will not have a good ecosystem management plan taking forth. The final one was the next one, which is actually the big lie number 3, which is not that one. Let's try the next one, which is Pynchon, who was the actual father of the Forest Service, promised that we would make money from the forest lands. He said the object of our forest policy is not the presence to preserve the forest because they are beautiful or because they are a refuge for wild creatures, but to make the making of prosperous homes. Every other consideration is secondary. The goal of the Forest Service was to make money for the federal government. It failed. Like the first national park was in Yellowstone. That's 1872, created in Wyoming territory. And for the first 6 years, we didn't fund it. The second national park was in Mackinac Island in Michigan, which we gave back to the state of Michigan because they were better stewards of the land. They could be, they were, they are, and they will be in the future. The fact that we have Mackinac Island in Michigan and Adirondack Park in New York State clearly illustrates that states are equally competent to the federal government in controlling, preserving, and managing public lands. The next national park isn't created for another 18 years, and that's Yosemite. But by 1916, all of a sudden, there are 14 national parks that have been created, and once again, the federal government says, well, what do we do? Okay, so naturally, you create a national park system, just because. There was no plan to it, it just simply happened. The BLM, Bureau of Land Management, was organized in the New Deal era to inventory and dispose of public lands. There was never an inventory, they still don't know what they actually own, and there was never a disposal that took place, just because. In the 1960s, the head of the Park Service realized if he had more parks in more congressional districts, he would probably be able to get more money. He was right. Today, there are national parks in 49 out of the 50 states, and Delaware is frantically trying to find some territory that they can make a national park in their state. However, they also control the bulk of the money. The park system is only 13% of the amount of land controlled by the federal system, but they have the bulk of the money. His efforts were right. BLM land, in contrast, is 41% of everything we own, and they have significantly less money to do what they deal with. But it creates another significant problem, because when you talk to our good friends in the East about lands, public lands, there is a difference in point of view. To them, a public land is a national park. So when they think of public lands, they think of a pretty tree by a pretty lake. When we think of public lands, we think of sagebrush. We are using the same words, but we are not talking about the same thing. I told one of the newspapers, sarcastically, that I thought an oil rig would actually enhance the beauty of some of the BLM land. It was sarcasm. It's also true. Driving out to Vernal a couple of weeks ago, those oil rigs actually did enhance part of that public land. But we are talking differently. I was in one of our committee meetings when a congressman from New Jersey was glowing all over the Park Service director, and he said to him, the national parks are where we go to recreate and to recreate. So I leaned over to Raul Grijalva, who is the guy next to me, the ranking Democrat, and I said, did he just say we have sex in the national parks? And without missing a beat, Grijalva simply said, you got to do something to keep those urban youths coming into the parks. We are talking in different words. And the thing is, you can keep that difference if you want to, but it's costing federal taxpayers to do that. Every year, we spend $8 to $9 billion more to control the West than actually income that comes in from the West. I also want you to see that it may be different in just the way the state of Utah looks at things, if I have the next slide properly. Yeah. Like, if you look at that, the amount of blue is the amount of private property that's in each county. Wayne and Garfield County, I feel sorry for them. They got 4 and 3% of all their county is privately owned. They're not going to have a future for their kids if they wanted to. But I also want you to look at some of the others. Salt Lake County, where we are right now, is 80% private property. There is a different point of view, even within this state, as to what property actually is. We have a different viewpoint to it. And it's one of the things that I think you clearly see as you start talking about the way we look at lands in the future. Okay, how much time do I actually have? Because I want to get you back on time here. 4 minutes. I can't possibly do anything in 4 minutes. So let me do this very quickly. We talk about science. I want you to know that I think science is a sham we fight. In the progressive era, they decided to solve democracy by getting rid of democracy, and instead having decisions made by an elite scientific group. Now, if you like that, you call it the administrative state. If you don't like it, it's nanny government. Nonetheless, we hide behind that concept. Constitution decided that people should be able to make their policies and decisions. Progressive era said we want elite scientists to make those policy decisions. And I promise you, it does not work. Government policy, to be accurate, deals with consistency. Look at the EPA today, and you realize that people will not expand their businesses and create jobs if they don't know what the policy is going to be tomorrow. It simply happens today. If you have a piece of property and you want to decide whether to use it for grazing or wilderness, what is the scientific matrix that you use to do that? Every land, even your backyard, has wilderness characteristics. What is the threshold to make sure that your backyard is not considered as wilderness? There is no science. That's your goals. That's personal ideas. That's what your feelings are. If you really cared about the health of the forest, you would make sure that you thinned it. So the forest would be healthier. You would stop the infestation. The forest fires would not be as disastrous, and the habitat for animals would be better. But hikers and campers don't want to simply see cut trees. They want to see old growth. It simply is, we hide behind that view. It's not there. It is actually policy that we try and come up with. Now, when you have the panel with Ken Ivory, you're going to talk about how Utah needs to have its lands back. So I'm running out of time. You have to cover it. Just make sure you do it well. I'm also going to have to do this very quick. Let's go through this. There are unintended consequences of this. That's how much 1/3 of America is controlled by the federal government. That is bigger than every country of the world except for Russia and Canada. Why 1/3 of it should be controlled by the federal government is beyond me, but there are unintended consequences, because if you look at the tops, those states in red are the ones that have the hardest time funding their education system. Look at the bottom, and that's where all the public lands, and you will note there is a similarity, and it's not even close to it. We grow our government funding for public schools at half the rate the East does. Even though we tax our people higher than the East and we spend more of our money on education than the East, we can't generate the money, not just because we don't have the property tax, but if you cannot develop the resources on our public lands, you have no spin-off industries to try and generate property tax and income tax, as well as the royalties and the severance tax that goes along with that. That's part of the spin-off problem that we have that has to be changed. It has to be changed directly. Look, conventional wisdom says that only Washington the level of Washington are the only ones who think about broad public interest. And conventional wisdom will say that any government agency making a decision has to take precedence over local consensus. And I just want you to know that conventional wisdom is stupid. In the 1990s, we realized, I don't have time for applause, I'm sorry. In the 1990s, we realized the states were better for controlling welfare than the federal government. Someday we will realize the states are better for controlling land policy decisions than the federal government. That it is obvious that the West no longer needs to be protected from itself. The status quo we have right now, which is to help special interest groups, is a futile policy. And the gridlock, the bureaucracy of the national government gives us means they have lost the ability to manage their land. They have lost the legitimacy of managing their land. Lincoln once said this nation could not survive half slave and half free. I'm going to tell you the West cannot survive half colonized and half free. It is time for a new paradigm shift of how we deal with lands. You are the ones who have to be responsible for that paradigm shift, and I wish you well in coming up and helping us to do that. It's been 60 years since the last time we reviewed our position. It's time to look at the lands anew and come up with new policies, new traditions, and new standards, and I thank you for being here.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yesterday I stood up here just kind of practicing, and it was a whole lot easier when nobody was in those chairs. Now, Rod told you what he thought about me when he was on the elevator. I thought he had a good face for radio myself. My topic today is the difference between liberty and freedom. About 18 years ago, I erected a flagpole on the north side of my home in Indianola, Utah, to honor my son, Jared, who was serving a proselyte mission for his church in Brazil. I was very pleased with him, and I knew somewhat of all the uncertainty he was going through, being uprooted from family and loved ones, leaving friends behind. See, years earlier, I had been drafted during the Vietnam War and had joined the Marine Corps, and I had several similar feelings. When I made this flagpole, I set it in concrete. And just before the concrete got too hard, I took some marbles and I formed around the base of the flagpole the word liberty. Now, I don't know if I knew what liberty meant back then per se. I just knew how I felt when I had the finished product when I raised that flag. I thought about my father and his brother, sons of immigrants, who fought valiantly in World War II. My father was at Pearl Harbor when it was bombed, and he fought in almost every major campaign in the South Pacific, receiving the Purple Heart, the Marine Corps Citation Medal, and the Navy Cross. His brother received the Bronze Star for valor. I thought about the founding fathers of this nation, and I thought about all those who settled these valleys. Maybe some of you have had similar feelings in your life. Liberty is one of those words that just stir our hearts. And then about 3 years ago, I was walking out to the barn to feed the animals, and I just happened to turn around to look at the flagpole, and I recalled the word liberty at the base. Then the thought occurred to me, the words liberty and freedom. And I said the words must be different or mean different things because they were separated by the word and. But I didn't really know what the difference was. So I began to study. But my studies had not come without some prior preparation. 25 years ago, I realized the importance in my own personal life about the Declaration of Independence. The reason I started studying the founding documents of the nation is I was coming home from work one day after I was a roofing contractor by trade, and I thought to myself, there's got to be a way, using the founding documents of this nation, to protect the Christian principles this nation was founded upon. Because after all, I can't go around telling people what you're doing is wrong because Jesus said so. I knew that wouldn't get me very far. So I began to study and to read and to listen to everything I could possibly get my hands on concerning the proper role of government. My first major breakthrough in understanding the proper role of government using a founding document was the Declaration of Independence. I'd like to share a few principles with you that are important to understand if we're to understand the difference between liberty and freedom. One of the phrases in the Declaration says that the 13 separate nations, the 13 different colonies, would be guided by the laws of nature and of nature's God. Now, what did that mean? Well, I knew what the laws of nature were. If I jump out of an airplane without a parachute, I'm going to probably die. But I didn't know what the other part meant, and of nature's God. Well, according to the founding fathers, William Blackstone, John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, and others, it meant the Holy Scriptures, the 10 Commandments, the revealed Word of God. Now I had something that I could use to defend the Christian principles the nation was founded upon and explain to people why democratic socialism is so destructive to our form of government. For example, it violates 4 fundamental commandments. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not covet. And here's the one that everybody forgets. Thou shalt not lie. In order to promote democratic socialism, at some point you have to start lying through your teeth. Then the founding fathers appealed to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of their intentions. Rectitude means righteousness. We don't have the freedom to do whatever we want, but what we ought to be doing. Now, why was this important? Because all my life I was instructed that the majority rules. Well, what if the majority is wrong? What if the majority wants abortion? What if the majority wants sodomy, same-sex marriage? What if the majority wants all the blessings of the Berlin Wall and wants socialism on one side and communism on the other? You see then that it doesn't matter what the majority wants or the minority. Any law that violated God's law was unconstitutional. And this then, God's law, here's the key word, would be the tempering influence on a pure democracy. And then last of all, we learn through history, it says, the Founding Father says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Well, we know from the Civil War that sometimes self-evident doesn't mean obvious. But when things are explained within their proper context, then we begin to connect the dots. And then we have one of those aha moments. Well, this nation was founded upon Christian principles, as you know. But as I started to learn these things about the Declaration, at the same time, I started memorizing some of the great Founding Father speeches, in part Patrick Henry's Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech. And I started memorizing the preamble and other great works. Thus, my familiarity with the word liberty at that time. And then, as I got older and aged, things started to change. I wasn't so much interested anymore in winning the cultural war, even though that's important. I was more interested in bringing people to Jesus Christ. And then the thought occurred to me that day when I was looking at that poll, I wonder if there is a direct connection between the Ten Commandments and the Constitution, similar to the one that I had found using the Declaration of Independence. If this could be shown, if this could be proven, then we would have two founding documents, two witnesses created by the Founding Fathers under the inspiration of our Creator that could and would address every issue that we now face in America. Just using the Constitution itself, for example, without the blessings of the Declaration of Independence as America's moral creed, is abortion, is sodomy, is socialism really constitutional? And if not, why not? As I began to study the difference between liberty and freedom, my heart and mind were open to an aspect of the Constitution and to the gospel of Jesus Christ that I had never considered before. The Founding Fathers believed that this nation was founded upon Christian principles, eternal principles, gospel principles. In a letter dated June 28, 1813, John Adams writes to Thomas Jefferson. He says, and I quote, "The general principles upon which the founders achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity. I avow then that I believed and now believe that those general principles of Christianity are as eternal and mutable as the existence and attributes of God," end quote. Well, if this nation was founded upon eternal principles, gospel principles, where would be the most obvious place to go look for a definition of liberty? Well, everybody told me, well, go to the 1828 dictionary by Daniel Webster. I didn't do that. I went to the scriptures themselves. There are approximately 37 quotes on liberty in the scriptures, but for this presentation, I'll just use a few. In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 17, it states, "Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty." Now think about that. And then in James chapter 1, 25, it says, "Whoso looketh upon the perfect law of liberty, and continueth therein, being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed." And then in James 2:12 it says, "Speak the law of liberty." From these scriptures, we see that liberty, then, is integral to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Indeed, liberty is at the heart of the gospel of Jesus Christ. The Lord's law, His word, and His Spirit. So by definition, liberty is adherence to gospel principles. Why is this important? Because in the preamble of the Constitution, where it says, we the people, the preamble states the purpose of the Constitution. And one of the purposes was to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So let's go through it just for a moment. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, a more complete union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So what was the purpose of the Constitution? One of them, to secure the blessings of liberty, to secure the blessings of adherence to gospel principles, not only for ourselves, but for our posterity. So if liberty, by definition, is adherence to gospel principles, what has the Lord said about abortion? What has the Lord said about same-sex marriage? What has the Lord said about socialism and communism? What has the Lord said about debt? Now you can look at any piece of legislation and know for yourself what's right, what's wrong, what's constitutional, and what's not constitutional. Does this law promote liberty, or does it destroy liberty? Does it promote gospel principles, or does it destroy gospel principles? In James, when we hear about James, when he talks about the works, what was he talking about? He was talking about keeping the commandments of God, all of them, in reference to liberty. So when people tell you there's nothing in the Constitution that addresses these moral issues, it's embodied in the word liberty. And how are we going to form a more perfect union, a more complete union? How are we going to establish justice? How are we going to ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, and promote the general welfare without the blessings of the gospel? The reasons we used to have laws against sodomy, abortion, socialism, and so forth was to remind every generation that some things are just wrong, thus to secure the blessings to ourselves and our posterity. So when people tell you, why is same-sex marriage wrong? Why is abortion wrong? Why is socialism wrong? You can tell them that it destroys liberty. And that just opens up a whole different conversation. Now, we're told, the scriptures say, proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. Not democracy. Proclaim gospel principles. This was the divine destiny of America. This was the hope of America from the Founding Fathers' perspective. Now we have two documents, two witnesses that testify of all the things, the Christian principles that this nation was founded upon. And so, in conclusion, I remember what Patrick Henry said. He said, I know not what cause others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. Give me God's law. Give me God's word. Give me God's spirit or give me death. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me get this loaded here. Good morning. I'm pleased to be here with you this morning. I always enjoy coming out to these freedom conferences that Bert and Kathy put on. It's a tremendous opportunity. I don't know how many of you were here 2 years ago when I was here. Some of the stuff that I'll be talking about today, both this morning and this afternoon, I mentioned 2 years ago, but not much. One of the hopeful aspects of what's going to be coming out of this meeting today is it's going to energize you. I have a PhD in ecosystems analysis. and climatology. Led a multi-million-dollar research effort in climatology back in the 1990s and realized that it was not man-caused. There just wasn't any scientific evidence to support it. There still is not. In fact, there's even less now than there was before. And yet the agenda goes on. And I said, what agenda? I had to look at it and find out what was really happening. And that's what led me to where I am today, is the realization that there is a huge agenda out there, and I'll be touching on a little bit this afternoon, to control our lives, all of our lives, everything from A to Z. It's through Agenda 21 and Sustainable America, and it's really starting to have some real true costs, not only on our liberty, as Jim was just talking about, but also our economy. And what was the source of that? That's what led me to what I'll be talking about this morning, is the fact that in my book, new book, Plundered, it's been only out a couple months, I describe what is known as the progressive movement. Now, it's been mentioned twice already about progressivism. I've always looked at it from an academic perspective. It's only about a year and a half ago that I began to realize that this is a very, very dangerous ideology, and it's now controlling our political system, it's controlling our legal system, judicial system, our media, and our educational system. We are in a heap of trouble because of this ideology. Why is that important? Well, what I'm going to be talking about today, or this morning, is the war of worldviews. I'll be talking about some other subjects this afternoon, but let's move along because we are late. We've all heard about John Locke, mentioned already a couple times, and the fact that he has introduced a concept based in liberty. It's really based in private property rights. I'll discuss that a little bit later. But Frederic Bastiat, the Frenchman who basically wrote the law, I think many of you have probably read it. Sir William Blackstone, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison were all students of Locke. All of them. Our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence is based on the principles that Locke laid down. They lead to liberty because it's you and I that are the government. You and I that are the sovereigns under this system. That has been no longer the case. The Locke law, or what Jefferson called the people's law, is a balance between tyranny and anarchy. It's based on God's unalienable rights that he's given mankind, to each of us. Each of us as individuals are sovereigns, making our own decisions based on what God's law tells us. Then you have city government, has a little less power. They're elected by us. County government, in which case the sheriff resides, and has really constitutionally the greatest power in our nation. More on that later. State government has lesser powers. And then finally, under this system of government, the federal government has the least power of all, and no power over our day-to-day lives. Most of that power under the 18 enumerated powers given to it by our Constitution are dealing with international affairs, trade, and so forth. However, those have been subverted, as you well know. It's already been discussed this morning. The Constitution, as has been illustrated, is not there for the people and to control the people. It's there to control government. Therefore, it's not a living document. It's not a dead document either. It's based on what President Obama calls negative rights. It hinders the government's ability to do things deliberately, because government is nothing more than raw power. And our founders, all they had to look around at that time is what was happening in the world, and they knew that raw power of government was something to be avoided at all costs. Now, the other opposing philosophy or worldview that is now dominating our political system is based in the theories and writings of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social contract, along with many of his other writings, have led to communism, Marxism, John Ingalls, Marx, as well as George F. Hegel, have led to what we now know as communism, fascism, you name it. All the isms come from this particular philosophy, and it's utterly dangerous. We're seeing Europe fall apart today because it's built on a very unsolid foundation of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I'll just give you a very brief look. I normally talk a lot more about this, but we don't have time. What we're seeing here, I'm just thinking this one quote, this is the heart of the Rousseau model, is that the state in relationship to its members is master of all goods through the social contract, which within the state is the basis of all rights. President Obama calls this positive rights. Is what this government is supposed to do for the people. Now, if you had a benevolent government, that would be fine. But you know, the governments are run by people and people are corrupt. And as a consequence, what always starts out as good intentions always causes major problems. That's the root of progressive ideology, is that the state is master over you and I. We're no longer sovereigns. The state is the sovereign over our lives and dictates to us what we can and cannot do. Rousseau said this, each of us puts his person and all his power in common under the supreme direction of the general will, and in our corporate capacity, we receive each member as an individual part of the whole. That's it in a nutshell. At the very minimum, that's Marxism. In application is communism. And so what you have is the reverse of the Locke model and what was laid out in the Constitution, is you have an all-powerful federal government who is the sovereign basically over the states. The state becomes merely an administrative unit of the federal government, as does the local government, county and city, and you and I only have those freedoms that are allowed by the state. Do you see now why the opposing worldview that has taken over our political, financial, judicial, media, and so forth is so utterly dangerous? Because it is an ideology that is diametrically opposed to the founding principles of our Constitution. It's incredible when you really begin to understand how dangerous this movement is. And this afternoon I'll be talking more about some of the things that makes it so utterly dangerous. They base their decisions on emotion, not on reality. There have been books written about the progressive ideology by psychiatrists that they say they basically don't have a full deck of cards that they're working under. Just in case some of you are not convinced, I'm only going to play a very short clip of this. I know we're running out of time, and I don't want to take any more time than necessary. But it is, I think, very informative.
Hi, I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching us tonight. President Obama and the Social Compact. That is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. This week, the president will hold 3 town meetings around the country trying to sell his vision of a strong America based on responsible spending and, quote, the Social Compact. What's that? First, the president talking about Republicans wanting to cut the budget.
This vision is less about reducing the deficit than it is about changing the basic social compact in America. And I don't think there's anything courageous about asking for sacrifice from those who can least afford it and don't have any clout on Capitol Hill. That's not a vision of the America I know.
So again, what is the president talking about? The Social Compact, also called the Social Contract, was made popular by French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 18th century. Basically, Rousseau says that a central government has an obligation to help its citizens in pretty much every way. The dictionary definition of the term social compact is this, quote, an agreement entered into by individuals that results in the formation of the state or of organized society, the prime motive being the desire for protection, which entails the surrender of some or all personal liberties. Very interesting. The desire for protection is not only against Al-Qaeda or Attila the Hun, but also against starving or being homeless. America largely avoided the social compact until the Great Depression in 1929. So many people were suffering that President Roosevelt began the Entitlement Society, that is direct federal help for those who were in trouble economically. In 1935, the Social Security Act was passed providing money for the elderly. Since that time, the federal government has grown enormously, and now America faces economic ruin because it owes more than $14 trillion.
Notice he said that back a year and a half ago. Last week, we just passed $16 trillion. I'm going to go into much more detail on that this afternoon. We are in a heap of trouble. That isn't even the tip of the iceberg as to the financial problems that we're about to encounter. He also said this, Rousseau also said this, that the humble Christians turned under a visible leader, Jesus, into the most violent and earthly despotisms. The church, being founded in lies and errors, deceives men and makes a people bloodthirsty, intolerant, so that it breathes fire and slaughter, killing everyone who does not believe in its God. Well, there has been evidence of that, unfortunately, within the Christian history. But that's not what Christianity is all about. But nonetheless, Rousseau developed his own religion. It's a civil religion, he said. And basically, he says that the government can banish from the state whoever does not believe in this civil religion, and that if he does not believe in the tenets of the civil religion, let him be punished by death. He has committed the worst of all crimes. Now, I didn't think a whole lot about that until I began to look at the consequence of what this belief system has done over history. Basically, both fascism, Nazism, all of this directly goes back to the concept laid down by Rousseau. The French Revolution was one of the most bloodthirsty revolutions in the modern history of warfare, based on the idea that Robespierre laid down that virtue is accomplished by the heel of a boot, through death, through torture, through all of these things. It wasn't that just people were killed or guillotined during this period of time. They were actually pulled apart by horses while they were still alive. It is literally a bloodthirsty kind of thing. And if you look at history, what you'll basically find is that at a minimum, at an absolute minimum, some people think it's 200 million, but at an absolute million, 124 million people under this form of governance have died and been murdered by their government. And all you have to do is to look at some of the riots, some of the things the president has said, to realize that the only thing that's holding him back right now is the rule of law, and he's doing everything he can to override that. Now, progressivism is in both political parties. Don't think it's just because you're a Republican that you're immune from this, because you're not. The Republicans are what we call neocons and rhinos, basically have a belief of fascism. If they had their way, they would have fascism with high cooperation between companies, industry, and so forth, and government. And of course, we know that the liberal progressives believe in socialism and Marxism. They both believe in centralized world government. In that, they're in total agreement. Both are marching towards reorganizing our Constitution, or ignoring it, in order to create a world government. I'll talk a little bit more about that this afternoon. The Republican progressive is more interested in being the world's policeman, and even war, going to war at the drop of a hat. That's what started this huge deficit spending, was the war going on in the Mideast. whereas the liberals, or the progressive liberals, are anti-war. Heavy regulation, public-private partnerships, radical environmentalism, government-town control of everything for the Democrats. The controlled capitalism. We don't truly have capitalism in this country anymore. We don't have free market enterprise. It's controlled capitalism and very high taxes. Whereas the liberals look at the huge social programs, heavy taxation, all of us are very quite familiar with that. And of course, we got some examples. We don't know yet where Romney stands. Some of his past records suggest that he might be part of this group. But we certainly know that Obama is. Now, some of the things that you need to be aware of, and we're just going to get barely through this and we'll pick it up again this afternoon, is that there was a book written in 1895 by an early psychiatrist by the name of Gustave Le Bon. He called the book The Crowd. It's a discussion of the early progressive movement that was going on in Europe that turned Europe into a socialist group of nations. And he says this in his observations, that the sentiments and the ideas of all the persons involved take one and the same direction, and their conscious personality vanishes. A collective mind is formed, but presenting very clearly defined characteristics. One of those is that he's no longer himself, but he's become an automaton, reacting automatically. Are we seeing that today? They most often have a very distant relationship with the observed fact. They cannot connect to reality. They noticed it even back then. This afternoon we'll talk about some of the modern examples. They cannot connect to reality. Everything is based on emotion. He called it collective hallucination. And I think that's a very good term. They have a sense of invincible power, and they will shout down and discredit anybody who opposes them, denigrate them, demonize them, because they don't really have an original thought of their own. They have a contagion of thought. Somebody comes up with a perfect slogan one day, and across the nation, you see the same slogan being parroted time after time after time across the media. An individual sacrifices his personal interest to the collective interest, doing things that are not necessarily in their best interest, that are utter contradiction of his normal characteristics and habits. And the mere fact that he forms a part of an organized crowd, or what we can call a mob, a man descends several rungs in the ladder of civilization. Isolated, he may be a cultivated individual. In a crowd, he's a barbarian. And we actually saw that in many cases, and I'll talk more about that this afternoon, of this in the Occupy Wall Street movement last summer. At public meetings, the slightest contradiction on the part of an orator is immediately received with howls of fury and violent invective, soon to be followed by blows, expulsions, should the orator stick to the point. How many conservatives have tried to talk on a college campus in the last 10 years and have been shouted down? How many conservatives have tried to talk in public and have been shouted down? This is a characteristic of that mentality. And then finally, Rousseau's philosophical ideas resulted in the French Revolution, took nearly a century to implant themselves, the striving of an entire nation towards the conquest of social equity, or what we call today social justice, and the realization of abstract rights and ideal liberties caused the tottering of all thrones and profoundly disturbed the Western world. And many of those nations in Europe now are collapsing. I do not see any real hope. I'm going to pick up on this afternoon. This is a recording of the debt clock turning over $16 trillion last week. But that's not even the start of it. The start of it, basically, if we look at it, is $50,000 or $51,000 per person. Deficit spending now $1.2 trillion. This is the real boondoggle. $120 trillion of unfunded liability in Social Security and Medicare. This is what the progressives of both political parties have given us. Thank you.
Congressman Bishop, Jim Noorlander, and Dr. Coffman, thank you very, very much. A preview of what you'll hear a little bit later on today. We want to especially thank Jim for his essay. You all have copies on the table, and for Bert and being able to have those printed and distributed for you today. We continue now with our program. Our next segment, Reclaim Our Western Lands, brought to you by our conference partner, the American Lands Council. It will be introduced by State Representative Ken Ivory, here from the state of Utah, with Utah's Chief Deputy Attorney General John Swallow and Elko County Commissioner Demar Dahl. Gentlemen.
Doug has an announcement, so while our gentlemen are coming up, I'd like a raise of hands. How many of you are from outside the state of Utah? Maybe stand up, wave, so we can welcome all of our Western guests. And I'd like these two gentlemen, the Bakers, to stay standing. Wayne Baker is the owner of Freedom Arms, one of our conference vendors today. This is his brother Lloyd, who I danced with a year ago on his 100th birthday.
Very quickly, ladies and gentlemen, the registers tell us that there has been quite a large interest in the Sons of the American Revolution Constitution Celebration Banquet tonight. So I talked to the caterer. The caterer is willing to be flexible. What I would need to know is how many who have not registered or spoken with me would want to come to that banquet tonight. If you would, I need to have you raise your hand. So I'm seeing 1, 2, 3. Oh, 3. Why don't you, okay, so are you saying 4 or just you? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, if you'll come see me at the break, we'll sign you up and we'll make arrangements for you to attend. Thank you.
We're good to go? Great. What an honor to be with you. What an absolute honor to be with you. First, I want to thank sincerely Bert and Kathy for convening us at their great personal expense to reconnect to our rights and I believe our duty to, as Jim mentioned, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. What an honor. This is a wonderful time to be alive. I hope Dr. Coffman didn't depress you too badly because we're going to be talking about solutions. But what a wonderful time to be alive. 16 trillion in debt. He didn't even mention that if the government does its books the same way we do our books, the overspending every year is $5 trillion a year. You know that? You had your Sweet 16 party last week, right? Right? Isn't that amazing? But yeah, here, this is the USA Today just a few months ago. If the government does its books the way we have to, it's not $1.5 trillion a year overspending, it's $5 trillion a year. And then, of course, you know, we've got the federal government managing our forests for maximum combustion. You know, spewing billions of pounds of pollution, killing hundreds of millions of animals a year, and decimating our watershed. And then, of course, we've got this. And John Kenneth Galbraith, the world-renowned economist back in the 80s, said, when it comes to socialized ownership of land, only the USSR and China can claim company with the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's amazing. It's amazing. What I'm excited about is today, throughout the rest of the panel, you're going to hear about what do we do about this. If we can run around with our hair on fire, that's not going to help anybody. But I want you to know that you are leading the way. What we've done in Utah and what's happening in Nevada and what's happening in New Mexico and what's happening in Arizona and things that you'll hear about throughout the rest of this conference, you, in giving courage to your jurisdictional giants in your counties and in your states, you are leading the way and things are happening. And we'll talk more and more about that. What I want to talk about just quickly before I introduce my friends who are leading out. 2 months ago, I was in Washington, D.C. on the day that the knot Affordable Care Act decision came out. I was taught in law school by my only conservative law professor, the tax professor. He said, if you put the word not in front of any named federal legislation, you're going to be more accurate 90% of the time. The not freedom this and the not freedom, whatever that, the not defense authorization, whatever, right? The not Affordable Care Act decision. But I think we've been misreading that decision. That decision, I believe that decision is the grow up decision. Now, none of us likes to hear grow up. It's not a pleasant thing to hear. But if as parents you keep making the decisions for your children, they have problems, and they come to you, Dad, I got a problem, and you solve the problem, and they come again, and you solve the problem, and you solve the problem, and you solve the problem, and 10 and 20 years go by, and all of a sudden they come to you, and they're 30 years old, and they say, hey, Dad, would it be okay if I acted like an adult from now on? That's what this decision is. This is the grow up decision. Let's look at just a few things from this, right? It says here that the federal government has expanded over the past 2 centuries. But it still must show that a constitutional grant of power authorizes each of its actions. That's this Supreme Court, guys, 2 months ago. The same does not apply to the states, however, because the Constitution is not the source of their power. The states do many things that aren't authorized in the Constitution. Schools, zoning and planning, punishing crime. It's not in the Constitution. States do not need constitutional authorization to act. Our cases refer to this general power of governing possessed by the states, but not by the federal government as the police power. The framers ensured that the powers which in the course of affairs, they were just mentioning this, Jim was mentioning this, concerned the lives, the liberties, and the properties of the people were held by governments more local, more accountable than a distant federal bureaucracy. Michael talked about this as our very ideology. We protect life. We secure liberty. We hold sacred the private right and control of property, and then we're accountable to our supreme creator for how we bless other people's lives with the blessings of our unalienable rights. That's our unprecedented ideology. And it created the greatest prosperity and liberty and freedom the world has ever seen. But as Michael mentioned, and you'll hear more, there is a revolution of ideologies. And it's being fought with lizards. And it's being fought with trees and with sage grouse that we're still hunting, for Pete's sakes. But those are the human shields with which we're fighting this ideology to undermine the foundation, the right and control of property. That's our very ideology. That's the very foundation of our liberty. And you're going to hear more about how to act in that. Let's go more on what they said. The independent power of the states. That's not Mother May I. That's not Pretty Please. The independent power of the states serves as a check on the power of the federal government. Denying anyone government complete jurisdiction over all the concerns of public life, federalism, the governing partnership, not subordinate subdivision, not dependent. The governing partnership protects the individual from arbitrary federal power. Like the federal government telling Tombstone after 130 years of using their water, great American ingenuity. In the 1880s, they run water lines 30 miles up to the mountains to 25 beautiful, pristine mountain springs and bring life to a desert. And after 130 years, when the government mismanagement causes massive fires, and on the heels of that, they have 1,000 years of erosion damage in a month from their floods and wash out their water lines, and the federal government comes up with an arbitrary policy that says, no, you can't use your road to access your water to bring water to your city. Our policy would prefer that you have 30 minutes of water between you and your town burning up. Our policy would dictate that you use the only well that you have that's 80% of the arsenic limits because we have a policy. No, 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 no. This independent power serves as a check on that arbitrary, irrational federal power. This is the Supreme Court 2 months ago, guys. Here's the money quote. In the typical case, we look to the states to defend their prerogatives by adopting the simple expedient of not yielding to federal blandishments, coaxing, coercing, cajoling. By adopting the simple expedient of not yielding to federal blandishments when they do not want to embrace the federal policies as their own. States are separate and independent sovereigns. Sometimes they have to act like it. And so this conference, thank you to our good friends Bert and Kathy for bringing us together to remind us of our rights, our stewardship, and our responsibility to act like it. And in Utah, as Congressman Bishop mentioned, and by the way, with his tremendous help, with Senator Lee's tremendous help, with our governor's tremendous help, with John Swallow's tremendous help, with Team Utah's tremendous help, we're now moving out to other western states. I just got back from Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico. We're going to Idaho. Nevada's got a bill filed. They're all joining with you in acting like it. We'll be in Wyoming on the 15th of October. But you are standing up to give courage to your jurisdictional giants. Hot Rod Hundley is famous for saying he and Wilt Chamberlain, who he played with, combined one night to score 52 points and win the game. And if you ask Rod, you say, well, Rod, how many points did you score? He says, doesn't matter. We won the game. And if you press him, he'll say, I scored 2 points. But it doesn't matter. They won the game. We all have to score our 2 points and keep feeding the ball to our jurisdictional giants, because that's why we put them there. And when the other team boos, and they're booing already, aren't they? When the other team boos, we've got to cheer even louder. And when they jam the ball home, we've got to give them encouragement. That's our system. This is the opportunity we have. Folks, this is a wonderful time to be alive. We are lucky not to live in pale and timid times. We've been blessed, as Ronald Reagan said, with the opportunity to stand for something. So, it's my great pleasure to first introduce to you Commissioner Demar Dahl, Commissioner in Elko County, Nevada. Been on the forefront for many decades, acting like it as a separate independent sovereign. And you'll hear from him on how they're acting like it in Nevada. And then you'll hear from my good friend John Swallow, who will be our next Attorney General in the state of Utah, who has been acting in that role as Deputy Attorney General now and has been instrumental in so many of the actions in Utah where we are acting as an independent check with this separate and independent power to act like it against arbitrary and irrational federal policy. Commissioner Dahl.
My friend Grant Gerber, who is here today, said, tell him the story about your story about liars. And because of our tight schedule, I wasn't going to. But then when Congressman Bishop was talking about all of the lies that had to be told to get us where we are today and the other things that we're told about, speaking of Congressman Bishop, you know, in the new administration, which will be sworn in January, I just was sitting there thinking, wouldn't it be great to have Congressman Bishop as our Secretary of Interior? There was a school teacher who went to her principal one day and said, I've got a real problem. I've got a boy in my class every morning when he comes to school, he tells me a big lie. And the principal said, well, next time he does that, send him up to me, and I'll tell him a bigger lie, and maybe he'll get the idea and he'll quit doing that. So the next morning, the boy came to school, and he said to the teacher, my grandfather and I were fishing yesterday, and we caught a fish so big we pulled it into the boat, and it broke the boat. And the teacher said, that was a big fish. Go tell that story to the principal. So he did, and he told the story, and the principal said, that's nothing. Just this morning, I was walking down the sidewalk just about to school, and out of the bushes right next to the sidewalk stepped this great big bear. And from the other side of me, I saw a little bitty dog, and that little bitty dog jumped up, and he grabbed that bear right by the throat and killed him. And the boy said, that was my dog. And he said, that's not the first bear he's killed either. I want to add my thanks to, how much time do I have?
Your group has until 10:56.
Okay, well, if I get taken too long, just because I want to add my thanks to Bert and Kathy Smith. Kathy told me once that she had married her hero. Bert Smith was my hero, is my hero, and has been a hero and a mentor for a long time for me. And what I'm to talk about today is what we have done in Nevada as a state. And most of what has done in the state originated in Elko County. But what we have done to stand up against the federal government and to stand up for our rights. In order to talk about that, I have to talk about Bert Smith. Do you know that Bert is the grandson, and I don't know, you are, most of you, I hope, familiar with your Utah history. He's a grandson of Lot Smith. And I got thinking about that yesterday, and I thought, you know, I probably don't remember that right, because I knew Bert's father, Pinto, and the idea that Pinto Smith was the son of Lot Smith couldn't have been. He must have been the grandson. I called Bert's niece and asked, is that really true? Yeah, he really is. Early on in Nevada, when I was a young man, I started going to cattlemen's conventions, and Bert Smith was always there. He has a ranch in Ruby Valley along the Ruby Mountains, just a different valley than where I am. And I started to learn a lot of things from Bert. And then in the mid-'70s, we had a letter for all of from the BLM state director, Ed Rowland, who sent a letter to all of the cattlemen and said, we're going to institute suitability criteria, which there were 4 things they were going to do that if we got that letter today, it wouldn't mean anything to us. But in those days it did, because that was the first real onslaught from the feds that came toward the livestock industry in Nevada. There were 800 ranchers showed up in Elko County at the Stockman's Hotel, and we tried to decide what we were going to do. We walked away from there without making a decision, but shortly after that, at the annual Cattlemen's Convention in Elko, I got there at the hotel, ran into Bert. He said, come to my room, I've got an idea. And I went up there, and he had drafted a resolution to present to our Public Lands Committee. He and I were both serving on the Public Lands Committee. He had drafted a resolution that said that, according to the Constitution, the federal government wasn't to own 87% of Nevada, and outlined what they were constitutionally able to loan. And then the now therefore be it resolved at the bottom said that the state of Nevada claims all of the unclaimed public land, so-called public land, can't remember the exact words now, within the state of Nevada. Well, he and I took that to the chairman of the Public Lands Committee, who later claimed and got credit for being the father of the Sagebrush Rebellion. And we said, here's this resolution, we want it presented to the Public Lands Committee. And he said, he read it and said, it won't fly. He said, we can't, this is too radical. We can't get this approved. And Bert said, try it anyway. And so he did, and it passed. It went to the General Assembly, and it passed without a dissenting vote. Nearly every state in the West passed the same resolution. It went to the National Convention, remember that, Bert? And it passed without one dissenting vote. And Bert Smith is the father of the Sagebrush Rebellion in Nevada. We didn't win the Sagebrush Rebellion, but we performed an important function. We did a lot of education. We had buttons on our lapels, and we went to Washington, and the button had an outline of the state of Nevada on it, and inside that it said 13%. And we went back there and explained to everybody, we are a 13% state. And it caught on, you know, that same, then after that resolution, then we got the bill through our legislature, our SB 321, that was based on that resolution. The other states, most of the states in the West passed the same legislation, but they all put sunset clauses on their legislation, and we didn't. And ours is still there, and it's still alive. Now we have submitted a new BDR that's going to come up in this legislature based on what Ken did in Utah. And I think we're going to have success there. But everything that has happened in Nevada on public land issues and on land issues in in general, and that then has affected the West, Bert Smith has been an important part of. One of the things that we did in Nevada that happened in the year of, well, we did a number of things. We had a Kelly Spring experience where some rancher fixed a spring. He didn't have a permit to do it, so the BLM came in and covered the spring with dirt, if you can imagine, and covered the spring up and prevented him from using it. We got a big effort going. We got a lot of people there. Bert was in the middle of that. Grant Gerber, who is here someplace, was leading that charge. Everything that we would do would kind of set the feds back in Elko County, and they'd leave us alone for a while. And then here they would come roaring on when the new people would come into position. One of the things happened was in Jarbidge. The Forest Service closed a road in Jarbidge, which is a little teeny community up in a canyon north of Elko, up in the northern part of our county. And when they closed that road, there was a lot of controversy about it, and our assemblyman, John Carpenter, said one day to the press, we're going to open that road. And then Grant Gerber, who, along with Bert Smith, has done as much or more, probably, than anyone on these kinds of issues, he masterminded this effort that we were going to have to open that road. And he put together the Jarbidge Shovel Brigade. He's the one that took us to Tombstone and put together the Tombstone Shovel Brigade that Ken was just talking about. But he engineered me into being the president of the Jarbidge Shovel Brigade. He gave me a lot of instruction and said, this is how we're going to win this deal. We had 2,000 people come into to Jarbidge. It was a tactical nightmare trying to figure out, you want to get all of these people an opportunity with a shovel to get down there and participate in opening the road, and it's in a little narrow canyon. But anyway, we did it. We did it, and we stood up to them, and because we stood up to them, we held them back for a while, and then that was in 2000. Then in 2009 here, they came with travel management. And the Forest Service, in their travel management plan, just ran roughshod over our county. And in 104 documented contacts that we had with the Forest Service, we only won on one area, which in the end didn't count for anything. If I had more time, I'd tell you all about that. But anyway, because of what they were doing to us, and because they ignored our economic impact study, which said that it was going to cost us $168 million because of what they were doing. They ignored that. They didn't pay any attention to our land use plan. And they went ahead here just this summer and finalized the record of decision. And because of that, we were able to get, not because of that, but during that process, we were able to get a congressional hearing held in Elko. And the Forest Service thumbed their nose at Rob Bishop's subcommittee of the Natural Resource Committee of Congress. They thumbed their nose at us in Elko County. But because of what happened there, the American Lands Council was born out of the frustration of what happened to us and what we were not able to do. And just like every effort that is important, that is necessary, that ever accomplishes very much, it has to be funded. We went to Bert Smith for funding to get the American Land Council going, and he put up the money that got us up and running. So from the beginning of the Sagebrush Rebellion, clear back in the 70s, up until just now, Bert Smith has been at the beginning, he's been in the middle, he's been all of the way through, and he was the man that made it possible to get us up and going in what we're doing today. I have a great deal of appreciation for him and for him getting all of you here today and for us being able to celebrate our freedom and remind each other of what we have to do in order to be able to keep it. Thank you.
Well, good morning. My name is John Swallow, and I am the Chief Deputy Attorney General, and I am a candidate for Attorney General. So Ken, thanks for the plug. It is great to be with you. It is great to be here at the invitation of Bert and Kathy, great Americans. As Sean Hannity would say, he's a great American, and so is she. So it's great to be here with you. Thank you very much. I have an 8-page speech to give, but I think I'm going to kind of hit and miss it a little bit and just visit with you about some of the things that we're working on and some of the things that I'm concerned about as a member of this country, as a citizen, as a resident of Utah, and as a person who works as the Chief Deputy Attorney General right now. I've had some great experiences, and I want to share with you some principles and some things that I feel that we're trying to do and some things that we need some help with as we go down the road. By way of introduction, I did have a chance when I was younger to serve in the state legislature for 6 years, and it was amazing to have that experience as you apply the principles that you learn when you're growing up and in college and in life with the practical side of setting policy for the state. And you have many opportunities when you're in an office like that to declare with your vote where you really feel and stand about the principles of freedom and the principles of our government. A great man, Henry Thoreau, once said that for every 1,000 hacking at the leaves of evil, there is only one person striking at the root. I love the Constitution. I try to carry it everywhere I go, and in my office, I have a whole bunch of them, and I like to hand them out. And I hand them out at the great donation of Bert and Kathy Smith, because they've let me know that anytime I want to give a Constitution away, they have plenty of them, and they stock me up with those, and I'm able to hand those out. The Constitution is really the foundation of our freedoms, because that is where great and inspired men, and back then it was mostly the men who were involved in politics, they were able to take their experience along with a lot of inspiration and distill the principles of freedom. Now, we've all watched the movie, maybe seen the play The Sound of Music, and in that play and movie, that script, Maria, who is teaching children, tries to teach them to sing, right? And she starts with this song that says, let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. When you read, you begin with A, B, C. When you sing, you begin with Do, Re, Mi. And I would say that when we talk about freedom, we have to begin with Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3. Because if we go back to the principles of our Constitution, we will solve a lot of the problems that we're having. And land use and land management and land ownership is just an indication of a warping of America with respect to the constitutional principles. The Constitution set up a government, a federal government, of limited authority and enumerated powers, right? And we also understand that those powers were predicated upon the people. The other great genius of the Constitution was the concept of dual sovereignty. And Ken mentioned earlier the concept of sovereignty, and I have a quote here from Chief Justice John Roberts as well, based on the Obamacare ruling, that I'm going to read to you in a minute. But sovereignty, dual sovereignty, is important to understand. I think today, as I talk with people, as I see what's happening, a lot of times we see and talk about sovereignty of the states, and we say, oh, that's just some word that the Founding Fathers talked about to placate the states. I mean, if you ask any fifth grader, you know the show Who's Smarter Than a Fifth Grader, right? If you ask any fifth grader, what is the sovereign entity in America, what would they say? They would say the federal government, right? That's all powerful. They would never guess or imagine. I think I've met one fifth grader in my last year of campaigning that gave the right answer. Well, sovereignty is important, and the concept of dual sovereignty is powerful. And I want to explain it in a way that I think anybody could understand it. When I got married, my wife and I became dual sovereigns. Before that, I was a sovereign unto myself. But I became a dual sovereign with her. And when we bought our first house, we made a deal. We decided we'd become dual sovereigns, and the way it worked was was very generous. She gave me sovereignty in a very small portion of our house. I had the garage and the shed. And I'm king in those two areas. Last night I told a story at a picnic, and I just said the garage, and after we walked away, my wife said, no, you have the shed as well. So she has the whole rest of the house, and she's sovereign in those areas of the house. Okay, tongue in cheek, right? The point is we have the federal government that was given complete power in very limited areas. And they're sovereign in those areas. There's a supremacy clause where they're sovereign in those areas. But right now we have the federal government parking cars in the master bedroom and leaking oil in the kitchen. And what we need to do is get the federal government back in the garage. They're not the enemy. They're just all over the house. And that's what we need to do as Americans and wake up to that point. So again, if we go back to the Constitution and understand the limited role of our federal government, then we understand how sovereignty works. Now let me read the quote from Chief Justice John Roberts, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Obamacare because it all fits with public lands and what we're doing, and we're doing some amazing things with public lands thanks to the help of the legislature, thanks to the great work of Kathleen Clark, the director of the Public Lands Office, and our governor. A lot of great things are happening, and certainly thanks to, again, the leadership of Mark Shurtleff, our Attorney General in the courts. Chief Justice John Roberts said this: "The federal government must show that a constitutional grant of power authorizes each of its actions. The same does not apply to the states because the Constitution is not the source of their power." What is the source of the power of the states, by the way? The state constitution, but the people. We the people. We the people have ultimate power in this country. And it's true. And I believe that just like I don't go to the refrigerator unless I'm hungry most times, all right? The people in America won't wake up to the problems we're having in our government until they get hungry for freedom, until they see the impact of a 16 trillion heading to 124 or whatever it's going on our rights and our freedoms, our ability to stay away from hyperinflation and to do the things we want to do in education, educating our own children, and not having the federal government dictate what we have to teach our children, and not even having the state government dictate how we raise our children. All right? Freedom is important, and people won't wake up to the principles of freedom until they're losing it, like I don't go to the refrigerator until I'm hungry. And I think the American people are starting to get hungry for freedom. They're starting to wake up, and the way we see things today is not how we're going to see things in a year from now, in large measure thanks to the efforts of great people like Representative Ivory, who's flying around the country spreading the gospel of freedom to different states as well and getting people energized and excited. And I know many of you are doing the same thing, and I know Bert and Kathy have spent their lives doing the same thing. Here, finish the quote. "The same does not apply to the states because the Constitution is not a source of their power. Our cases refer to the general governing powers possessed by the states, but not by the federal government as the police power, because police power is controlled by 50 different states instead of one national sovereign. Because police power is controlled by the 50 states instead of one national sovereign, the facets of governing that touch on citizens' daily lives are normally administered by smaller governments closer to the governed." This is a principle of freedom, my friends. It's a principle understood by the Founding Fathers. It's a warping of those principles that has gotten us into the mess we're in right now in America. Chief Justice John Roberts understands that. I don't agree with his ultimate conclusion in the health care lawsuit. Disappointed me, it broke my heart. We were so involved in that and had the perfect case. But a lot of great things came out of that case, including the defense of the Commerce Clause, the limiting power of the Commerce Clause, which could have wrecked this country if that mandate had been held to be constitutional under the Commerce Clause. There would have been no limitation to federal power from that point forward. That was a major victory in that case, even though we lost the ultimate constitutional argument because they found that the taxing power made the mandate constitutional. Still, we saved the Commerce Clause, which is a huge thing, and I'm so grateful that 26 states stood up and defended the Constitution on the Commerce Clause. My goodness, what a lesson was learned by the states and by the attorneys general for that fight. The framers thus ensured that powers which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people were held by governments more local and more accountable than a distant federal bureaucracy. The states, and this is a great concluding statement by him, the states are separate and independent sovereigns. This is not an item taken from mythology. This is not something we were told by a kindergarten teacher to pacify us. This is a statement by the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court 2 months ago in majority opinion. The states are separate and sovereign and independent sovereigns. Sometimes they have to act like it. Wow. It's wonderful. And it's true. It's a true principle. And what does that mean to us? And how does that impact the land issues that we're dealing with today? I do not believe, I wasn't there, but I don't believe that the Founding Fathers ever would have envisioned that these independent sovereign states would ever have a majority of the land within their boundaries, managed and controlled and owned on a day-to-day basis by the distant federal government, the limited federal government that they were created. I don't believe that that was the intention of our Founding Fathers, nor do I believe it was the intention of the document they created through their collective experience and debate and through the inspiration that came, I believe, in the preparation of this mighty document, the Constitution. So what does that mean? It means that we're warped, that we've warped these principles over time. Now, if you look at the land management history, when the country was expanded through the various grants they received in the West, the acreage of the West was acquired. For the first 130 years or so of our government, the attitude and the policy, as Rob Bishop, Congressman Bishop so eloquently explained, was a disposition policy, was not a management and conservation policy. And when Utah became a state, with the Enabling Act passed in 1894, and we became a state in 1896, the policies were the same. There was a disposition policy. Now, when you look at the Enabling Act, our Utah Enabling Act, which was the congressional act which set the terms and conditions of our statehood, you can read into that act that there at least is an ambiguity about whether the federal government would keep the lands or the lands would be sold and disposed of, as was the historical practice up to that point in time. But unfortunately, shortly thereafter, in the early 1900s, the federal government started to change its policies with respect to the lands that it held. And about 234 million acres shortly after that were taken out of the disposition kind of can, and very little land was disposed of after that. Until in 1976, with the passage of the Federal Land Policy Management Act, it became very clear that the federal government turned completely away from disposition of the lands to the complete management of those lands, to where we are today. We had the Sagebrush Rebellion come out of that. Well, Utah has done, I think, a remarkable job. The legislature has funded additional resources for us to beef up our public lands litigation team. A few years ago, we stood up and filed a lawsuit, which is ongoing right now. We've won some victories in that lawsuit about stopping the executive order that would have created more wilderness-type lands in our state. We had to stand up to the federal government and the Secretary of the Interior when they're trying to take away access from us. We're fighting battles on the Endangered Species Act and trying hard to keep the sage grouse from being listed as an endangered species, which would wreak havoc to the development of our public lands. But the real problem we have is that the federal government constitutionally probably shouldn't be even owning the land, should have disposed of these lands. Now, what is the solution? I just have a few minutes left. What is the solution? What is the end game for us? America has to wake up. Glenn Beck, in the introduction to the 5,000-year leap, he said he was discouraged. He was walking down a street in New York, the Avenues of America in New York, and it hit him. The solution to our problems with respect to the debt issues, the control issues, and even the public lands issues is America has to wake up, because we, the people, have the power to solve the problems with America. Yes, the Attorney General's office has the role to litigate these issues, and we are doing that, and we show that with the Obamacare case. We've shown it with the public lands cases we have right now. But we can't do it alone. The way this will be solved is the way that Bert and Kathy Smith, Ken Ivory, and all of you are doing it. We have to educate the people about the constitutional principles, and then we have to wake up America. And when America wakes up, we will be able to get back in control of this. We will influence elections. We will influence public policy as we see the infringement on our freedoms that are caused by these terrible policies that are not in accordance with the Constitution. We will begin to wake up. And I believe that through the work of attorneys general throughout the states, as in the Obamacare model, when we had 26 states on board, and we created a lot of public discussion and energy, through this process, we're going to wake up America, and through a litigation, through legitimate litigation, perhaps on a case under a breach of the Enabling Act theory, and we're working on the theories that would bring that into play if that is an option the state decides to go. But with the collective work of the states, governments, AGs, and governors, and with the help of the people, I believe there is great hope. Now, in conclusion, as a call to action, I just want to say this. Back in the 1800s, there was a man named Dred Scott who was an African-American slave. And the Supreme Court of this country said that he was not a man. Now, if you looked at it in the context of that time, you never would have believed that a non-human, according to the Supreme Court, in the worst decision I think ever rendered by the Supreme Court, which is absolutely wrong, right, could ever become president of the United States. But you've got to look at this issue of lands and the issues of our freedoms in the context of that case, that the people can make anything change. And I firmly believe that our public lands problems and the ability to get to our energy, to create jobs and fund education, and create an energy-independent America and get back our freedoms on lands will change as America wakes up and as we continue to push through litigation, through research, and through great people like Representative Ivory and all the others, Congressman Bishop, wherever he went, Bert and Kathy Smith, and all of you patriots who understand the principles of our Constitution of this great land. Thank you very much. God bless you. It's great to be here with you. And I believe in the cause of freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Just a super job. Now, are you ready for a little stretch? I think we all are, aren't we? All right, let's take a little break. Let's say about a 14-minute break. We need you back by 11 o'clock. How's that sound? Stretch your legs a little bit. We've got, make sure you take a minute and stop by our vendors' booths. The restrooms and everything are out in the lobby. When you come back, we'll have another round of panelists. We'll talk about sound money, and then Sheriff Richard Mack on the role of the constitutional sheriff when you get back. Again, we'd like you all back in your seats, if you would, please, by 11 o'clock. Thank you.